Okay, hey, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have another awesome new update for you from the brand Citizen. Now a little bit about them. They were founded back in 1918 by both Japanese and Swiss investors. They eventually settled on the brand name of Citizen Watch Company around 1930. Now the Citizen Group does own Miyota, Belova, Arnold & Son, Frederic Constant, Alpina, and Campanola. And one of the nice things is that you can still get some really nice JDM pieces that are made in Japan, this being one of them. Now, they're really best known for their more affordable quartz offerings, and that's probably for good reason because they did help Seiko kind of disrupt the Swiss watch industry during the quartz crisis. So, this particular type of watch, I'd consider it an everyday dress watch. Some key common characteristics and design language, you're looking for something that can be worn every day, but also dressed up quite a bit. You're going to really want that clean, classic aesthetic with minimalist designs and something that is sensibly sized. This is the JDM Citizen Collection NB1060-12L, and it's pretty much Citizen's take on a truly Japanese dress watch that can be worn daily. It utilizes a very clean and minimalist layout, and it is highlighted by some finely executed details. This particular dial really showcases their unique textured silver leaf lacquer dial and its blue variation. So with all that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay guys, now some of you have noticed this isn't on the OEM strap. It actually does come on a very serviceable blue strap that honestly didn't add enough contrast to offset this amazing dial. So I did put it on this 19mm gray suede strap from B&R Bands. They make great straps, and so I tend to buy their stuff pretty often, and they do have it in 19mm. So I did give away one dimension, so let's get to the rest of them. It's 38.2mm in diameter, it's 12.2mm thick, including the crystal, and it's 46.4mm lug to lug. So really nice dimensions from that perspective. It is in stainless steel with a very nice Duratec hard coating, which is basically a surface treatment that does give you some protection against scratching. So very nice, and actually very, very clear. In terms of the actual tone, it still is a nice bright tone versus something like the Seiko coating, which can add a little bit of a darker tint. So one of the positives, although I'm pretty sure in terms of the hardness Vickers, not quite as hard as the Seiko coating, but still something to consider. But man, look at that dial. It's really the star of the show here. Also a really great movement. Check it out. And we'll definitely take a little bit of a closer look here in a few. But when it comes to everything kind of as a whole, you are going to get a nice double domed sapphire with inner AR coating. So you can see even at very harsh angles, still going to be quite legible and very readable versus if it would be a single dome or something like that. Because it is domed, you are going to see a little bit more reflection, more so just because of the studio light setup here versus it just being the anti-reflective coating, let's say, not being up to snuff. It definitely does an amazing job. I love how dynamic this dial is, guys. Look at the play, the subtleties in lighting, and that is with more so subtle lights, and we'll get into this with some less subtle lights and really dive in to appreciate the depth and the texture that you're seeing on this kind of multi-stage dial. But when it comes to some other pieces, it does have a push-pull crown, which is unsigned. The movement is a 4 Hertz movement, which beats at 28.8 vibrations per hour. It has a -10 to +20 seconds per day accuracy, and it does it has a 42-hour power reserve, which is definitely nice considering that it does have the higher beat rate there at 8 ticks per second versus, let's say, a 3 Hertz, which would be 6 ticks per second, or 3.5, which a lot of brands are doing these days, which can, I shouldn't say a lot, but basically within the Swatch group is happening. It's a thing at Omega at about 7 ticks per second. So The case back is a nice display case back, and there is some nice, etching in terms of around the border there to just kind of give you some specs. Very nice. But let's go ahead and get in closer on this dial. All right, guys, nice and tight on the dial now. And let's actually turn up the juice here and really enjoy. Wow. Check that out. Absolutely gorgeous. And you can even see some of the beautiful faceting that's done on those indices, which are, of course, applied. You do have that blue tone texture dial with hints of green and all types of other metallic. And there's a lot of warmth to this dial and a lot of depth and so much texture, so much light play, guys. Really, really just a standout within this price point. I mean, this is the type of dial that you will spend, 3 times this cost to find in something like a Grand Seiko. So really beautifully done. And let's just soak that in just a touch because it is that good. Now we do have the date, which is framed at the 3 o'clock. Nothing crazy, but it does have a nice little border there. As you can see, you get those nicely polished dolphin hands. There is no lume on this, unfortunately, but I think it does make sense in terms of the theme of the watch, so I don't mind it too much. You are still going to get 10 bar or 100 meters of water resistance, which works completely fine for me. But let's actually even flip it over and take a closer look at the movement itself. Very nice. You can see very clean, very modern, light decorations, nothing too complex, but you know what, it's a 3-hand movement, and there's not too much to it, but everything is done really nicely. You can see the gold fill on the text there, and then made in Japan, Duratec, the water resistance, so very, very clean. You see denotes the sapphire. Very cool. But this dial really is something special. So let's actually get into getting this actually on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay, guys, as you can see on my 7¼ inch wrist, this wears really perfectly at its about 38 millimeter diameter. You can see with more arm in the shot, very balanced, nicely centered on the wrist. And then if I get up close, yeah, it might appear a little oversized due to some lens distortion. But even then, at kind of its most awkward angles, it still honestly doesn't feel oversized or overpowering. A lot of that has to do with the balance of this dial, the fact that it is really because of that texturing and almost this light gradation towards the outskirts of the dial, where it does have a little bit of a darker hue and then the brighter hues towards the center, which again adds to that feeling of depth and design. You can see it lays nice and flat on the wrist. Very beautiful, and it's nicely balanced. This isn't a one-trick pony. This isn't just a super slim, kind of slimline type of watch, but it is quite slim. You might recognize this case from the NB1050 line, and it is the same case, and it does fit that bracelet. I am a bracelet guy myself, but I will say that the more elegant dial on here honestly calls for a better bracelet than that NB1050. I have tried swapping it onto this dial option and the pale silver dial, which I reviewed previously, and I'll say that honestly it is more of a distraction, unfortunately, and just leaves you wanting more versus it being a solution, at least in my opinion. So you won't see me wearing this on that steel bracelet. I think this is definitely the way to go because it deserves something a little bit nicer, and we'll see in the future if Citizen does release anything, but economically I doubt it would make sense for them to create a new bracelet for this piece. But hey, if you're listening, Citizen Japan, I think it could definitely be worth it. Although I will say that this look was definitely inspired by those I shouldn't say entry level, but yeah, for Grand Seiko, they're more entry level lines. With this, they're more time only, hand wound mechanicals. They do have some really great dials that have just been released within that very simplistic line. And I think this is a real competitive option to those. And it's so much cheaper, guys. I got this. If we didn't get to it yet, these are listed at $645 from Sakura Watches. So as long as they're in stock, guys, that's an amazing deal. Like it really is. And honestly, it's one of those things where it is such a beautiful watch. And you know, the nice thing is, nobody's going to wear this watch by accident. You're going to strike up some great conversations with folks if they do care for Japanese timepieces or just fine mechanical timepieces. This is a citizen that really is a conversational piece as well, just because of the level of fit and finish, whether it be that case, those beautiful transitions between the fine brushing there and that beautiful polished bevel, or we get into, of course, the amazing dial, and even keeping the dial texturing out of the conversation, just the finishing of these indices and just the really classic nature of this piece. I think it's an amazing combination, and it looks really great on this light gray suede strap, which does help it wear nicely. It does have 19mm lugs, and like the OEM, this does taper down to about 16mm down at the tang buckle versus the OEM strap, which actually uses a deployant buckle, which does add a little bit of extra thickness at the underside of the wrist. So I do prefer this more traditional layout, and it does lay flatter when you do have it off the wrist. So with that said, let's actually get into some low light transition, as there is no loom shots, and closing thoughts. Okay, we'll go ahead and hit the lights here. All right, as you can see, no loom, but I do like to get into some low light transitions because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, maybe the shade of a tree, or spending time in your favorite automobile. So it is nice to see how these colors, textures, and finishes render in less than optimal lighting, to include maybe some harsh lighting here, very high contrast, which typically could expose any type of defect within the finishing or just general wear. And as you can see, my goodness, all a little lighting does is unlock the depth of this dial. You get these hints of teal, navies, silver shimmers there, and even the automatic text at the bottom can kind of melt away depending on the angle of the reflection on this. Look at that. That is just gorgeous. And again, guys, I'm a big fan of the pale silver. Definitely a more minimalist approach to this texture, where in person you're probably going to be able to get the best view of it. And even when you're in person, it's going to only sparkle in, the most, I'd say, kind of optimal lighting situations. But my goodness, guys, the way that this thing shines, I gotta say, had it on the wrist all day today on a nice sunny day here in Southern California, and it was just pure fireworks. So wow, let's just take that in. And again, guys, what blows my mind is that this is far from an expensive timepiece. I mean, I know that's all subjective in terms of people's budgets, but this dial right here is something truly special that, at one point in time, you wouldn't be able to really find something like this without it being in the upwards of at least $1,000. And yes, Seiko does do some really great textured dials, etc., even in the 500 and below range these days, because they're really kind of reverse engineering a lot of that dial play and success from Grand Seiko. But I will say that this doesn't feel like a cheap alternative to anything. This feels like just an outstanding piece that was designed to do something very, very special in terms of the fit, the finish, the design, grammar that you're seeing here. It's not like it's a toned down version, which sometimes Seiko Presage can feel like, or even those really great dials within the Prospex line. It feels like just kind of a fun special edition. This doesn't necessarily give you a special edition, but it does still feel special. But it feels a little bit more purposeful. It feels a little bit more refined and a little bit more thought out, which I can absolutely appreciate. Now, in terms of closing thoughts, guys, on the wrist, it wears just perfectly. Smaller silhouette, but not undersized or overly flat. So it does have, I think, a well-balanced kind of roundness to it. And while the expansive dial does add extra presence visually, you know, at the end of the day, it's still not a large watch at about 38 millimeters, but it does give you more visual punch that maybe you could think of finding in a 39 or 40 millimeter watch. So you do still get great wrist presence if you do have a larger wrists. Now, in terms of model variants, there's this blue dial model as well as the pale silver model, or you could step down into the NB5010 line, which is, I'm sorry, 1050 line, which is going to give you a couple of different dial variations and handsets that are going to provide lume, something more in kind of that day-to-day style versus this being more of a dedicated dress watch. Those do come on bracelet, and again, those are solid watches that are actually much cheaper. A lot of the markup in price here is going to be, it's a pretty high quality strap, number one, from the fact that they're using good materials, and two, the main reason is going to be that dial in terms of it being kind of multi-stage and really multi-technique. It's going to have more overhead within production of the dial versus the other line being a little bit more straightforward, kind of sunburst array. Now, in terms of comparable models, guys, I mean, Seiko Presage, King Seiko, I think those kind of jump out as easy comparisons, but man, this is definitely more Presage pricing, but I think you lay this next to a King Seiko and it's very, very compelling. Of course, the King Seiko is going to give you a much, like, blows the bracelet out of the water that you can fit onto here, at least the OEM style bracelet you can get from the 1050 line. But you know, in terms of the dial play, I'm hoping that King Seiko will continue to release kind of dial variations. They recently released a light violet dial, which is really, really nice and seems to be catching steam pretty fast. But hopefully they'll eventually start getting into some more textured dials and not just colorful dials. But until then, this really kind of reigns supreme at that price point in terms of kind of the dial pairing and it being this under the radar everyday JDM piece, especially if you're not into wearing a bracelet. I mean, they both have 19 millimeter lugs when you compare this to the new, at least the non-limited King Seiko release. Or re-release, should I say. So, guys, for me, the bottom line is this dial can give you definitely a very similar wear experience to, you know, those 5,000 and up Grand Seiko watches, while not feeling like just another cheap alternative. It feels as valuable as it looks, and maybe even more so. And the crazy thing is you can still somehow purchase this for under $1,000, just under 700 US dollars. So for me, this really sets a new standard within that kind of watch idiot savant, that whiz community, in terms of value for money. And yes, you will have to be a bit of a watch nut to really truly appreciate this piece. But I will say, even those folks that aren't really enthusiasts within this space, they're just gonna see a really, really nice watch that is beautifully finished and really attractively laid out. So with that said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked the video, please do it like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.